I would invite you to, if you have a Bible or a phone, the scripture we'll be considering today to close out the service is from the book of Isaiah, Isaiah chapter 9. I'll read the text here. We're primarily focusing on one idea from this text, but I'm just going to read beginning at verse 2. Because it just plays into everything we've been talking about and these whole theme and season of Advent. Isaiah 9:2, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice because before you as with joy at harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burdens and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His authority shall grow continually, and there shall be endless peace. For the throne of David and his kingdom, he will establish and uphold it. This is God's good, beautiful, and true word. So we say thanks be to God. So I just want to mention three things to close out the service. One is the cultivation of a vision of peace. That's what this text is doing, and so I want us to kind of cultivate that just a little bit this morning. This idea of peace, this vision of peace. And then I want us to talk about the rhetoric of peace, how we talk about peace, typically in our lives. And then finally, we'll just kind of mention the reality of the great peacemaking power that is Jesus and how that works into our little hearts and lives on a daily, weekly basis. Okay, so those are the three parts. So in Isaiah 9:6, this is the verse we're focusing on, where this child is named and given a fourfold designation. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. So there's something happening in the historical context here that we're not going to go into this morning that will answer the immediate challenge and problem that Israel is facing in the wake of exile. In the hardships that they're going through, Isaiah is speaking very specifically to things happening to them and with them. And so this promise of a child or a king to take the throne of David has specific historical connotations about someone who will literally take the throne of David and be a part of the restoration process needed for these ancient people in this day. Okay, so that's like a historical context. But I think you'll understand that this fourfold designation is much bigger than just one king, one historical king can fill. Can any human that you know of take on this fourfold royal designation of Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace? No one human can hold the weight of that fourfold royal designation. So there's something bigger happening here as well. And obviously this morning, that's kind of what I want to think about. And we don't have time to work through every one of those titles because they're all loaded. Probably 1 year for Advent, I'll take 1 week and I'll do it on Wonderful Counselor. And then 1 week and do it on Mighty God. And 1 week and do it on Everlasting Father. But today, I just want us to think about that idea of Prince of Peace. What does it mean that a child is coming who will be Prince of Peace, a prince or a ruler of peace? In the Hebrew, that word isn't always translated prince. It just means ruler. There is someone coming who will rule in peace and rule with peace. Now, just saying that almost gives me goosebumps already. Because don't you want that? Don't you want somebody in our world to rule in peace and to rule with peace, dripping with peace? Oh Lord, come quickly, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realize that it's currently not the way things are. Regardless of how many carols we sing, with all the gusto we can muster, regardless of how many candles we light, we look around and there are just days and weeks and months and sadly for many years where we just seem to walk around in a funk, if I can use that word, which is another way of describing a lack of peace or a lack of well-being. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you had these days, these weeks, these years perhaps? And we're all very well aware, I think, of the strange world in which we live that is part shadow or darkness and part wonder. Have you felt this tension? Part shadow and part wonder. Shadowed by frustration, perhaps. Hitting a deer on some dark highway in a town of no consequence in New York. I'm not using personal illustrations. These just came to my mind. Or perhaps forgetfulness, leaving one suitcase in South Carolina due to a strange lapse of mental clarity and average thoughtfulness. Sickness, being in bed for days while assuming the next day will come when you will be better. Relational agitation, getting into an argument with one spouse or partner that should last for a couple of hours but instead drags on for days. All these random illustrations just popped into my brain. I'm not sure who they actually relate to, but I'm sure that you can identify with them. But yet, on the other side of all that daily, weekly frustration, anger, spite, disappointment, loneliness, there's good moments too, isn't there? There's tastes of wonder, even glory, when peace to all almost seems impossible. And it's in those little strange moments that often turn on the lights in our hearts, if even just for a little bit, even in the madness and the messiness. For example, my arm had been hurting for months. It was due to an injury that I unintentionally inflicted on myself involving a sledgehammer and a very stubborn concrete wall that I was trying to break through in our house. I'm sitting watching with my family this week a movie about the end of the world. It's just something we like to do. Watching a movie about the end of the world, it's called The House of Dynamite, and it was kind of a disturbing, real kind of look at what the potential possibility is. We're watching this, it's kind of disturbing, and so I don't know if it's because it was so disturbing and realistic that I wasn't moving for 2 hours or whatever, but I'm sitting on our couch, and I wish and I pray that I could remember what position I was sitting in, because it will matter to this story. But I'm sitting, and my arm's been hurting for months. And that's bad because I'm a very good basketball player, and so, it's my shooting arm, and I'm just joking. But anyway, it's just been bothering me, and so I was just like, is this tennis elbow? Is this old age? What is going on? And I would, go to pick up my coffee, and it would hurt. And so for me, that's a big deal. Every time I said, and so I'd have to use my left hand, which wasn't as enjoyable. And so I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, it's just like something happened, and all of a sudden, I felt like my arm was healed. And I was like, wait a second. Because it was just like, poof. And it was like, Christmas miracle, And I literally got up, and I was like, hey guys, I think my arm's better. I started practicing my shot again. It's like, wait a second, this is crazy. My arm just, what happened? I was just sitting there, now my arm is better. And I don't know what happened. It only lasted for a few hours because now it still hurts. But for a few hours, it was like a literal Christmas miracle visit us in that moment, and my arm was better for a few hours. And it's in those moments of wonder that we say, okay, so everything can be going crazy and messy and broken, and yet here's these moments of wonder and beauty and goodness, and we live in this tension. And then we add to that tension this vision we have of peace, of what the world should be. One Old Testament scholar named Walter Brueggemann calls this tension we feel the contradiction of reality and vision. We live in this contradiction of reality, the reality that we live every day, and this vision that we have and that we sing about and that we light candles for and that we read the scriptures about, and we live in this contradiction. And the way it actually works is we live our lives trying to push back or to make sense or keep under control the chaos that encroaches on every facet of our lives, day after day. So we attempt to push back the chaos of weight and weakness by exercising or eating more organically, or we attend to our emotional or mental chaos by getting things out, or maybe going to a therapist, maybe by blowing up a teddy bear or two. That's what a friend of mine at college did when his girlfriend dumped him. He just went out and shot a teddy bear. I don't know. I don't think it helped him, so I don't recommend it. In lieu of all the chaotic schedules of our life and our spiritual life, we try to sing Christian songs or Christmas songs, and we have a quick devotional. Maybe we read our Shadow and Light book, and we try to attend to our spiritual lives. We look at 2026 coming, and we say in 2026, we're going to deal more and more with the chaos of our own hearts, and the list goes on and on and on, and we're tired, and we have to live with this contradiction of what the way the world should be, the way we want our lives, and the way it actually is. And every single person in this building feels this. It's not just you. And maybe this is perhaps why even that non-biblical, non-theological vision of heaven that we have, like floating on clouds with a harp, bouncing around with the angels, singing songs, maybe that little restful state of bliss is appealing, even though it's not really in the Bible. I can understand why that would be appealing. You know what I'm saying? All the noise, all the pressure, just floating with a harp. Droom, 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 forever. That's not in the Bible, by the way. You know that, right? But I'm saying I can understand the appeal of that vision, that weird vision of heaven. Silas, when he was younger, or my son, once he said he couldn't wait to go to heaven because he said he won't have to deal with canker sores and he can walk on lava. I don't know. He didn't get that from my preaching. But apparently that's what heaven was. No more canker sores. Apparently that was the big traumatic thing in his life, cold sores. And then he could walk on lava. I don't know why there's lava in heaven. I don't know what this vision is, but he was like 5. So here's the point. Isaiah's oracle here in Isaiah 9:6 gives us something more robust to lay a hold of for this vision of peace. And it presses into the very practical reality of how we live. This concept of there's going to come a child who is going to be called by this royal title, Ruler of Peace or Prince of Peace, has a lot of implications that we just need to touch on. And one of those is this reality of what is peace. Shalom, or peace, the Hebrew word for peace is shalom, and it's much bigger in the Old Testament or in the Hebrew scriptures than our minds when we talk about the word peace. Peace in the Hebrew scriptures has to do with the whole of life coming together in harmony and beauty. All our relationships with others, with God, with creation, all exactly as they should be. That's what this bigger vision of shalom means in the Old Testament. So this ruler will be a ruler of shalom, a ruler where everything is connected in a beautiful and holistic and healthy and meaningful and rich and deep and beautiful way. Everything, every relationship. Our relationship with God, our relationship with family, our relationship with friends, our relationship with the very earth itself, it will all be interconnected and interwoven with beauty and goodness and truth. And that is the Hebrew vision of shalom. It's a vision of wholeness. As Walter Brueggemann, again, that Old Testament scholar, said, it's a vision of wholeness which is the supreme will of the biblical God. It is an outgrowth of a covenant of shalom, in which persons are bound not only to God, but to one another in caring, sharing, rejoicing community with none to make them afraid. This is the biblical vision of peace. It has to do with nature. It has to do with our economy. It has to do with our society. It has to do with our nation. It is all these things and more. And as you read the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures, you'll find there's two themes that stand out when the idea of shalom is talked about or described. And it usually has to do with the undoing of the chaos of creation and the oppression of empire over God's people. Those two things are dealt with. The chaos in creation, earthquakes and tsunamis and fires and all that brings chaos to our world, and then the oppression of empire over God's people. Both those things are silenced and put to rest. And that is one of the big visions of peace in the Hebrew Scriptures. Now compare that to the way in which we talk about peace personally, our rhetoric, how we use peace. It tends to be very small. We think of things like an internal peaceful state of the heart, which isn't bad, but that's not the biblical peace that's being described when it says this child will come and he will be the ruler of peace. We think of rest and quiet. We think of a lack of interference or friction. So we might say something like, I just need a little peace and quiet. And then if you've ever watched What About Bob? Bob and the other little boy reply, I'll be peace and I'll be quiet. So anyway, it's kind of a funny moment. But we bring this idea of peace down to a more of a personal level, which isn't bad, which isn't wrong, but it's small. And then we say, well, we take it up a notch, maybe socially or kind of in a group kind of idea, and maybe once a year we can imagine a group or an idea or a world where there is some semblance of peace or quiet or rest or calm or just a ceasing of fighting and argument. And that's not wrong, but it's still too small. And so then we take it to an empire or governments or superpowers, and we think of peace as a phrase that means there's no more fighting. And so empires throughout history have used this idea of peace when they have come in and crushed other nations and they've put the place to peace. They use peace as a way of talking about what they have brought back through great violence. And so once again we say there's some reality to that, but the peace that Isaiah is describing in Isaiah 9:6 is so much bigger. The reality is there is a great peacemaking power that will be at work. And we believe, and this is why we come every Sunday, and why we hang out together on Advent during the busiest time of the year, because we believe that there is one person who has done that peacemaking work and has this power, and his name is Jesus. And so we believe that Jesus is the ruler of peace or the Prince of Peace. And Jesus is no ordinary ruler because he brings peace in a non-ordinary way. He doesn't bring peace by inflicting violence on all so that he can bring peace like the powerful empires do. He actually brings peace by sacrificing himself, by laying down his own life in the greatest act of love in human history. Why? In order to bring peace. And so he accomplishes more than we could ever imagine with a different kind of royal force. And this is why Jesus used the word peace in such a strange way in the New Testament. He would say things like, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. He's linking salvation and peace together. He's linking healing, the healing of a body with peace. He would say something like, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. In other words, there's some kind of pathway of peace that Jesus, when he meets people and he brings a new opening, a new way of looking at life to them, they're able to walk forward in some way of peace that he describes. He uses it in a different way when he's considering the sadness of Jerusalem and Jerusalem not recognizing who he is. And he's prophesying how Rome will one day come and crush Jerusalem in some really difficult passages in the book of Luke, chapter 19. And he says this. He says, if you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Jesus is literally saying, I have come to make peace, and you don't see, you do not recognize that I am the great peacemaker who has the power to make peace for you, Jerusalem. And so he's weeping over Jerusalem. He's not only talking about a spiritual peace, he's talking about a way of life. This is why he is unique in his being Prince of Peace. He actually makes a peacemaking way. He does it because he is the Son who brings the very peace of the Father. He is the King who has all the necessary resources to resolve our lack of love for God and to push back the forces of darkness and evil and even empire and religion mixed up with darkness and evil often. He keeps us captive to chaos. He is the one who has the power to push all that back and bring in this whole vision of peace. He is the divine representative that makes peace between God and man in his own body on the cross. He inaugurates a day of peace between man and creation when he raises from the dead as the ultimate sign that chaos and brokenness of all creation, the groaning that creation has, will one day be no more. And he is the only one who can do this, which, by the way, is why we come back every Sunday and hang out together and sing and celebrate Jesus. So, we have 2 more minutes. So how do we work this in our hearts just throughout the week? I want to recommend a couple of things. First, how does all this correspond to our lack of peaceful hearts? Because if you're like me, you're like, well, this is all great, this big vision of the peace that Jesus brings, but what about my frustrated, confused, lonely, sorrowful heart that still walks out with me today when I leave here? Right? You can't take the worship band with you and just kind of walk around and they're singing to you. That'd be nice, but I don't think that's possible. Is that possible, Jamie? No, okay. Not possible. He says it's not possible. So what are we to do with this? Well, let me just recommend a couple of things. First of all, let me recommend we do this as a community. So as a community, we must press each other to a more robust vision of peace. So what we're doing right now is I'm trying to cultivate a bigger vision of peace. We've got to do that with each other. Because when we begin to focus on the things that are frustrating and confusing and painful, we need people around us that can cast a vision for the big, beautiful vision of peace that the Scripture casts. And that was a weird whistle in the middle of my sentence. I don't know where that came from. But we need people in our life that can do that for us. Can you remind me of this big, beautiful vision of peace that the Bible talks about? Remind me of what it means that Jesus is literally the ruler of peace? We need people in our lives that can do that for us. And so that's what we're here for, together. Let me also encourage you as a community of Jesus to remind each other of the historical gift of Jesus as God with us. The only reason we can sing peace on earth, goodwill to men, is because this child has been given this incarnated gift. God and man has been given to us, historically, a gift to us, so that we can literally say, God is with us. That's what Jesus represents, God with us. And so we need people in our lives to remind us of that, the beauty and the glory of that gift, especially during the season of Advent. And then let me also encourage you as a community of Jesus to help each other sink our feet in the solid ground of Jesus' peacemaking work on the cross. So this is why we celebrate this at least once every month. This month we'll be celebrating it twice if you come to the Christmas Eve service. Why do we do that? Why do some churches celebrate it every single week? It's because we have to constantly be reminding each other to plant our feet on something solid. Because don't you feel like when you walk around your normal life, like you're getting beaten back and forth, right? I felt like that this week, and I was in bed most of the week. And I still felt like I was getting beaten back and forth. So what do? We encourage each other to stand firm on the reality of what Jesus did on the cross, because what he did on the cross is what brings peace to all, eventually, fully and finally, to this world. So we have to root ourselves there. And then the craziness of life beats us, and we have people around us go, I know it's hard right now. I know you're lonely. I know you're sorrowful. I know you're sick. But remember that what Jesus did is bigger than all this. So keep standing firm on his work on the cross. We need people in our lives that will do that for us. And then finally, the last thing is, as a community of Jesus, we need to help each other and encourage each other with the hope for the ultimate peacemaking promises of God to be realized one day. Final and full shalom is the only possible answer to the brokenness of the world. The only way we can make all this mess work is if God restores all things back to its original glory and does everything that is necessary to bring justice for all, peace for all, for eternity. That's the only answer to this whole mess. And so we need people around us who will keep encouraging us with these words. Remember what the end of Revelation says. God says, behold, I am making all things, what's the word? New. I'm renewing everything. Every inch of this broken, chaotic world will be renewed by the power and peacemaking glory of Jesus. And so we need people in our lives that remind us of that every day. Behold, I am making all things new. Would you